Oh, hello there. Didn't see you come in. I was just reading up. Lots of rules, you know. I'm Chris. I'm going to be the Dungeon Master. Normally, when we meet like this, I would have a Session Zero to inform you, the players, what the campaign is about, the nature of character creation, the expectations I put upon the players and they can put upon me. But if we have 15 or 20 or 30 people, that's just not going to happen. So I decided I would film a Session Zero anyway and share with you those things I just said. So join me. Magic wardrobe change. Anyway, so there's some things, some ground rules, if you will, that I need to cover to share what it is about this campaign that's unique to my style of dungeon mastering and what you can expect, etc. First, number one, numero uno, expectations and boundaries. That's a good way to put it. Put simply, this is a collaborative storytelling game. We're all here to have fun. So rule number one, don't be a dick. It's pretty easy, right? Don't be a jerk. Playing an edgy character is fine. That's perfectly normal. Playing an edgy character who doesn't want to do anything with anyone else and actively impedes other people's ability to play the game, that's not perfectly fine. Don't do that. D&D can cover a lot of topics, being a storytelling game, a role-playing game. But there are a few topics that I don't ever tolerate at my table in my games. There will never be any kind of sexual violence. There will never be any kind of gratuitous or unnecessary violence to animals. Monsters don't count. And there will never be any child abuse or anything of the sort. I've been in a few campaigns where people have burned down orphanages. That's fine. That's kosher. But as long as we're not actually talking about or visually, graphically describing violence towards children, A-okay by me. But be careful, though. Just because I'm cool with you trying to seduce dragons, I'm going to ask that you vividly and graphically describe how you seduce the dragon. And I'll warn you, I've been around the block a few times with D&D. You're going to fold before I do. So, and then I think, obviously, respect everyone's time, right? You might not always like the choices that other people make. You don't necessarily agree with a character decision or with a combat action or something like that. That's fine. That's going to happen occasionally. You can disagree in character. That's also fine. But that stays in the game. You don't bring that out with players. I mean, these are like basic rules, right? See rule number one, don't be a dick. Rule two, or not really rule two, area two, category two, role playing. So this is the thing that scares the crap out of a lot of people when they start playing Dungeons and Dragons in general. It doesn't have to. Role playing does not mean has a silly voice or uses an accent. I mean, an accent or a silly voice can certainly help be part of a role play, right? But it's absolutely not what makes role-playing role-playing. On its own, it's just a voice. It's just an affectation. To be good at role-playing, all you have to do is play somebody or do something that isn't necessarily you or what you would do. That's the definition of the term. It's the beating heart of the tabletop role-playing game. It's to be something you are not necessarily. A lot of people want to make characters that are just enhanced versions of themselves. And that's fine, because that's the comfortable thing to do, especially if you're new. But I strongly encourage you to make choices and pick things and play characters that are not necessarily you. When it comes to role-playing choices, the only thing you really have to do is ask yourself, what would my character do? Right? Not necessarily what would I, Chris, do in this situation, even though it is still me making the decision ultimately as the player. You need to ask, what would my character do? This is why backstories and personalities are so important for role-playing, because it gives you the motivation and the understanding to make that kind of decision about what your character would do. However, before you go off and like stab your entire party to death and steal their clothes or whatever, because it's what your character would do, see rule number 1. Don't be a dick. You can do what your character would do without infringing on anyone else's fun. Try and keep that in mind. A good way to help, if you can't get into the role-playing thing, right? Again, you don't need a voice, you just need to make choices. You can use a voice. It's fun. I'll certainly use a lot because I'm going to be playing a lot of NPCs, which you all need to differentiate. If you want some help, a good way to think about it is, well, if you're unsure where to start, I guess, don't worry about making interesting or compelling characters with tragic histories and charming personalities or anything like that. Don't worry about any of those steps. All you have to do is try saying, I swing my sword, instead of my character swings her sword, right? It's a very subtle difference, but it is very effective at framing your character and role-playing. Numero trois. You definitely need a background. It cannot be a novel. Even in normal Dungeons and Dragons scenarios, I would permit quite lengthy character backgrounds, whatever you want. But this, aside from the fact that we have a lot of people playing, this kind of campaign is not very conducive to a long, complex, interwoven backstory, right? At most, I need or I should say at least I need a paragraph. At most, 2 paragraphs about your character's backstory. It can be anything. And when I release more information about the campaign world in the next couple of days, you can pick and choose anything that you'd like. Pretty much anything goes. This is not a super strict format here. It does not need to be elaborate. It does not need to be long. Just a little bit of information. Try and think, what are your goals? What motivates your character? Why is your character adventuring? Actually, that's the most important thing about your backstory. You need to have a reason why your character is adventuring. That's the whole reason why you're in this town where the campaign will take place, and it's the whole reason why you're going to be grouping up with everyone. So you need to have a viable reason to be adventuring. You could be the darkest, edgiest of brooding loners if you want, hell-bent on rejecting any kind of friendship and companions. Totally cool. But you need to justify a reason why you're grouping with these people, right? As tempting as a lone wolf character can be, it's not super interesting, and it's not super conducive to party play. So just keep that in mind. Number 4, Katra. Rules and mechanics from that book I just did a bit with, right? The Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook. There are a shitload of rules in this game. I got like a lot. I know a lot of them. This is my first rodeo, right? I've played D&D for a very long time. However, I certainly don't know all the rules. And I often forget or misremember the rules I do know. So that is to say that sometimes I'm not going to get things right. I will absolutely forget how something niche works, or something that you do won't even be described by the rules that we have. There's a lot of really circumstantial, weird stuff that happens in Dungeons and Dragons, and I just have to kind of wing it. That's fine. But when things like that happen, I will often make a judgment call or ruling about what needs to be rolled to determine what, and we'll just go from there. This needs to be respected, because if you don't do that, and we spend 30 minutes rules lawyering to try and figure out exactly the nature of the thing that is being done or whatnot, you lose a lot of playtime. There are precious few hours that we have to play to get through a lot of adventure. So if we spend too much time trying to figure out the very, very specific minutia of the rules, if it's not something that we instantly know or recall, it can get bogged down. So I'll make a ruling. If I'm wrong, or upon reflection later, I think maybe that should be done differently, I'll 100% let the players know. I will tell them later. I will say, look, I got that rule wrong. I made the wrong call about the number of dice to roll for that damage or whatnot. So henceforth, this is how that will be done. I'll do my best, but it is very likely that at some point I might mess up, but I will absolutely own up to it, and I'll let you know if that is the case. And then I guess the final thing is 5, numero cinco. Cinco, I should know that. Numero cinco, comparison. Many of you have not played D&D, which is great. You're new to this. Many of you have not played D&D, and you've watched media about D&D or consumed something about D&D. Some of you have played before or are very familiar with Dungeons and Dragons stuff. That's great. Something that I would discourage a lot of people from doing is comparing your experience to anything you're familiar with. The people that make professional Dungeons and Dragons content are professionals. They are voice actors and actors. They are literally paid to do this. They have production teams of people that help that game succeed. I certainly think it's wonderful that we hold ourselves to the standard of play that they embody when they do so. That's great, but I am certainly not a professional dungeon master. I am not a professional actor. I am not a voice actor. I'll do my best. I like to have fun, and I think that certainly brings out a high standard of play, but it's definitely not like things that you've seen. So try not to compare. I promise you'll have fun without years-long levels of emotional catharsis via Dungeons and Dragons. That's about it for Session Zero. I might make another video talking about how things like combat and spells work. It's a lot of information if you've not played before, and it can be a little overwhelming. But I'll be honest, I tend to prefer doing that kind of thing while we're actually playing, because just explaining how spells work kind of doesn't land until you actually cast a spell. So that, we'll see. I don't know if I'll do that. If you have any questions, please let me know. Oh, and I think something I forgot to mention, if there are any troublesome topics, if there are any areas about life or things that you'd prefer not come up, topics you'd prefer we do not broach in gameplay, just let me know. No questions asked. It won't come up. You can private message me. That's fine. I tend to abide by a lot of rules of common sense here. Things that don't really have a place in a fantasy game, I'm not going to include. So if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.